listening to the best of the Martha Zoller Show. To hear the full show each day, tune in to AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN or log in to accesswdun.com and click the Listen Live button from 9 to 11, Monday through Friday.
In France, meeting with Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, meeting with President Zelensky from Ukraine. Scott, I know I talked to you the day it was happening, but it was striking because he is not the sitting president. He is the president-elect right now, and yet here he was meeting with these world leaders.
It is the Martha Zoller Show, and yeah, he's the de facto president of the United States. And was there more to that audio? And I started talking? All right, let's play it again then. Or pick it up where it is. Can you pick it up where it was? No?
Looking quite presidential over the weekend.
There we go. Sorry.
Yeah, the country of the United States has moved on. The world has moved on. Donald Trump doesn't take office until January, but you can see the rest of the world is already treating him like he is the power center of the United States. And so I'm glad he went. This cathedral reopening is a huge deal to so many people around the world, Catholics, Christians. It's a historical moment. It was also a chance for him to talk to some of our biggest allies, people he's going to have to be coordinating with on some of these problems that Joe Biden is leaving behind. Donald Trump is hitting the ground running. I mean, he's already out doing the things that we need him to do to get the country back on track. So between his interview with Meet the Press, you can see here that Donald Trump is not going to have a passive presidency. This is going to be an active start to this presidency. And the rest of the world responds to leadership. We've not had a strong president. We have one now. Everybody knows it.
It is the Martha Zoller Show. He took a breath before. You know me. I'll get right in on the breath. But Scott Jennings is like, I know Shondell rolls her eyes about Scott Jennings, but to me, he is like the voice of conservatism right now. He's not a shill for Donald Trump, okay? He criticized Donald Trump when Donald Trump was doing things wrong, but he is the voice of conservatism right now. And he is going into the lion's den. He is on CNN. He is now on the editorial board of the LA Times, okay? Because LA had several districts within their area go Republican, okay? There was a 10-point shift in California from Democrat to Republican. You know, this has been happening in the New York area for a while, and they're not responding. Well, they are responding. Let me tell you how they're responding. The New York Times subscriptions are down, and the New York Sun and the New York Post are up. And people want to say they're, tabloids or whatever, but the bottom line is people aren't reading newspapers much anymore. But they are reading the New York Post. They are reading the New York Sun. They are reading online News Nation and other options. People are hungry. I heard Barry Weiss from Honestly. Barry Weiss was the woman who was hired by the New York Times after they got it so wrong in 2016 to kind of point out to them what they were getting wrong. And she's not a righty. She's far from it. She's more like a center kind of person. But she talked about Ground News, and you guys might remember that I used to interview the folks from Ground News on a regular basis. And I want to talk about Ground News again because it's a great app to use. They're finally monetizing it, okay? And I don't know how that goes because I've gone through this before. My mom said you shouldn't give it away for free because then nobody will pay for it. And she was talking about something different. But it is true as far as your content. If you give it away for free, then people won't pay for it. The best example of this is Rush Limbaugh. The only thing you got for free from Rush Limbaugh was the radio show. Okay? Everything else you had to pay for. For years into the digital age, he had a newsletter that you would subscribe to and you would get delivered to you and you would read it because it was different content than what you got on the radio show. He monetized his website from the beginning. Bill O'Reilly's that way too. Bill O'Reilly makes a buck off of anything that he does. The biggest mistake I've probably made in my career is I gave way too much away for free. But the reason was I had plans to run for Congress, and I did that in 2012. So I looked at everything I did as a way to lay the groundwork to run for Congress because I really wanted to do that. And I really still feel like I would have been a great member of Congress and I would have gotten a lot of these big things done. But But God knew, that was what Martha wanted to do. I'm talking about God a lot today, but it's just one of those days. Martha knew what Martha wanted to do, okay? But God knew that my husband was going to have cancer twice. God knew that our oldest grandson was going to have a condition called ITP. He didn't cause it, but he knew it. And he knew that my place was not in Congress at that particular time. Okay? And I feel like I've done more in helping other people get elected and also giving my advice to other people getting elected. Okay, I need to cough here, Logan. We're going to get a cough button in here in a minute, someday. But I knew what Martha wanted. Martha, from the time, and I know I'm talking about myself in the third person. It reminds you of Bob Dole, doesn't it? Martha, from the time I can remember, my dad was telling me I was going to be the first woman president of the United States. My dad was a big dreamer, okay? He would tell my sister she was going to be an Olympic swimmer. My brother was going to be a major league pitcher. My other sister was going to be an Olympic track runner. I had no athletic skills. I still have no athletic skills. Okay? And so he had to find something for me. So for me, it was, you're going to be the first woman president of the United States. And from the time, and again, I don't remember this. These are stories I've been told, but I always watched the news. When I was a little baby in a crib, in a playpen, remember those playpens that looked like jails? They don't have them anymore because I guess kids got their heads caught in the rails. I don't know. But it looked like a little jail. And I'd be in there sitting there. And believe me, there was no children's television on. This business of catering to your children about what they want to watch, that did not happen in the 60s. And when I was when I was an infant and growing up, you watched what your parents watched, or else you didn't watch television, or you went and played with your blocks or something. Okay? That's just the way it was. The idea that you were going to have a TV for the kids, no, that was not going to happen. So I would sit there, and if it was entertainment kind of television, I would play in my playpen, all that kind of stuff. And then when the news would come on, I would start watching. So I think this is kind of embedded into me. My theory is I liked the faces. Okay? If you notice, if you're ever raising a baby, that they are very attracted to faces. You can actually get them to watch the news when they're really young, because basically what is the news? It's a big face on the screen talking to you, right? So that's my theory, is that initially you get drawn to the kind of faces, the live television, and then we poison our kids with animation. And, that's just one of those things. That's one of those things. You can join us on the phones at 770-535-2911. You can also text us at that number. Look, we are in an amazing place right now. And I want to separate party away from this, okay? Because Donald Trump is not a traditional Republican. He has reshaped the Republican Party, but he is not a traditional Republican, nor is he a traditional conservative. Listen to what he says, not what people say about him. Listen to what he says. He's very reasonable. Let's talk. He brought up the Dreamers again. In 2017, he offered Nancy Pelosi. Now, what Nancy Pelosi wanted was the 800,000 Dreamer kids to get amnesty. He offered $2.2 million, so he included the parents, the Dreamers and the parents, which actually makes sense. You gonna legalize a kid that's underage, that was brought here by their parents, and you're not going to let the parents stay too? That made sense. It was compassionate. Okay? Jensen Franklin said, well, on this program, that Donald Trump didn't have the compassion genes sometimes, but on this, he did. So he offers her in exchange for $5 billion for the wall. I was talking to a Democratic operative this morning about this issue because he brought up the Dreamers again in this interview with Meet the Press. And she said they should have taken that deal. That was a good deal, and we would have solved this problem. Hence, I'm using the word hence, nobody really wanted to solve that problem. I think what people are going to get in Donald Trump is that he does want to solve the problems. Okay? He wants to solve the problems, though, while he's president. It's true that he interfered just a little bit on some things that maybe could have been done before he became president. He wants to get things done while he's president. He's talking about the Dreamers again. That's a compassionate thing. This is still a problem. I will never forget 25 years ago, a girl calls up from Colombia, who was originally from Colombia, and talks to Rush. And Rush was a hardline illegal immigration person. But he talked to this girl, and she said, Rush, my parents brought me here when I was 2 years old. I'm 35 years old now. I have gone to elementary school, high school, college, graduate school, married and have a family in the United States. I don't even speak Spanish anymore. I'm an American. And you know what? He responded to that. He understood that argument. It was a truthful statement. So he's going to deal with the Dreamers, but then pay attention. Pay attention to what Tom Homan says and not what the media is saying about him. And quite frankly, it's media that's nobody's listening to or reading. So you should just disregard it anyway. But Tom Homan's going to do three things. He's going to deport the people that have already gotten deportation orders. That is not mass deportation. That's not rounding up, because when you say that, you elicit an image of going door to door. That's not going to happen. These people have already been adjudicated and gotten a deportation order. They should not be here by law. Second, criminal illegal aliens focusing on felonies and violent crime. Number two. Three, find these kids, these 300,000 kids that are out here, because I just want to speak to my very left-leaning audience here, because I know that about 20% of you out there is. And I know you were part of the Me Too movement, and I know you were part of the women's liberation movement. I want you to listen to me. Why are you not up in arms about 21st century slavery of human trafficking in this country? I think that's something we could agree on. I've tried to get an answer from John Ossoff on this. I've tried to get an answer from Raphael Warnock on this. We should be united that these children being trafficked throughout this country is an abomination, and it is 21st century slavery. That should not be an issue. It should be our number one issue.
It's where North Georgia comes to talk. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
Ron Hart's here with us right now. Ron, so Trump got Man of the Year. He got to go ring the bell on Wall Street. And, things are going well for him at this point in time. What do you think?
Him, right? He weathered these storms of litigation, these made-up lawsuits against him like a man, and didn't whimper, didn't cry, just stood up and took it. I think America realized he's a strong individual. To agree with him or disagree with him, he's a strong individual who's decisive and he's going to hit the floor running on what he wants to do here. And to your point earlier about the newspapers, I was in D.C. Recently, and we went to the African American Museum, and there were African American newspapers, that proliferated in the South and the North. 100 years ago, they were just all African American newspapers, just for that. And there really aren't many of those anymore. Really, you had Ebony for a while and some other things.
Atlanta Daily World, has been purchased, and that was a long time. A long-time black-owned newspaper that was out there. But you're right that, 50, 100 years ago, there might have been 10 newspapers in a town. Okay, now you're lucky if you have one.
Well, here's the fundamental thing. The truth doesn't change, right? They can say what they want about it. They can emphasize what they want. They can ignore stories that don't fit their narrative, right? But the truth is still the same.
Yes.
Right? There was a fire on 8th and Elm Street yesterday. 3 people perished. Those are the facts, right? That never changes. The question is, what narratives do you emphasize? And the mainstream media's lost their credibility.
So I'm a talk show host, so I don't necessarily have to follow journalistic standards, but I do. And I remember from my old journalism class from back in the day, is that if you have a named source on something, you can go with that named source because you put their name with it. They say X, you say they said it. Whether you can put context around it on whether it's a fact or not and do check, but you don't have to do anything more than use their name and what they said. here's where I think the media I follow, the media I don't follow, the media I like, the media I don't like, make the huge mistake, is because they want to be first, okay? They go with anonymous sources, and the old standard used to be is you had to have 3 anonymous sources before you went with something that said basically the same thing. And now if they get 1 anonymous source, they go with it. They call it breaking news. They do the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so a lot of bad information gets out there first, and then they have to go back and clean up.
I was on a panel with a liberal. He started that whole trope about Trump went to Normandy, on D-Day, celebrate D-Day, looked over all these graveyards in D-Day and called them, these men, losers and suckers. Now, I told the guys, do you really believe all the emotion that comes over you as an American to see that Trump's going to call them losers? And the guy's lying. He's just lying.
Yeah.
Unnamed source, which is Milley, General Milley, it's the most political and terrible military officer, I think, of our time. But the problem with the Pentagon and the FBI and all these problematic issues, deep state in D.C., the person who rises to the top is the most aggressive political person known, right? Comey, et cetera. The ones that rise to the top of these agencies, Marquez, whatever his name is, the Homeland Security guy, Eric Holder, who was Obama's wingman at Justice. I mean, the most political and aggressive people run these organizations, and they do it for the purpose to help their candidate, right?
And the problem in the military is that, basically once you get to general level, it's political. You're appointed for 3-year terms. It's much more political. The generals that came out of World War II, for example, Eisenhower, Bradley, all of those guys, they were tested by war. Then we had a long period of time that we had kind of what they called the PowerPoint generals. These were generals that were more political than say, war fighters. And I think that that's what we're seeing now. It's kind of the end of that era. Norman Schwarzkopf came up through the ranks in the traditional way. Colin Powell came up through the traditional way. But there's a lot of guys like Milley and others that they came up more through the administrative path as opposed to the warfighter path. And
there's a great picture that passed around the internet, showed that Eisenhower showed a picture of him, be like four medals on his chest. When he's president, right before he's president, 4 medals on his chest. Then it showed Milley, like 17 medals on his chest.
Yeah,
He's been to no wars. He's done nothing. So, and he's like, this was for a PowerPoint presentation.
Well, and Eisenhower was interesting because he understood the danger of the industrial military complex, and I think that also, we're seeing it now with the FBI, with CIA, all this stuff, that our intelligence stuff was never ongoing until after World War II. Prior to World War II, you ramped up intelligence while you were at war, but then you disbanded it. You ramped up things while you were at war, and then you disbanded it. What happened after, and the Cold War was either a real or manufactured excuse, but after World War II, they kept all these agencies in place and bureaucratized them. I don't even know if that's a real word, but I think everybody understands what that means. It became a bureaucratization. They got pensions, and they worked there for a whole career, and it became a government job as opposed to a calling.
Yeah, true. And it's where it is today. We haven't had a legitimate war, I don't think, since World War II. Anyway.
No, we haven't.
Most of them have been manufactured by the CIA and the industrial military complex, including the one certainly the one in Vietnam with the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which was a fake CIA operation where our ship was never fired on. And the Gulf of Tonkin that began that war. Of course, Yellow Cake and weapons of mass destruction.
Well, and I think that goes hand in hand. That goes hand in hand with this 1-year deployment thing, because what happened is, up until World War II, if you joined the military, you were deployed until the war was over. So you did not come home unless you died, were injured, or the war was over. Okay? And that gave the impetus to the generals to actually come up with a strategy that would win. Okay, that would end the war. What happened, we started being nice and soft and say, we only want people to be gone for a year. Well, what that created, that sounds good, but the unintended consequence was that you ended up with a bunch of 1-year cycles of wars. And so that's why you had these long, drawn-out wars, because nobody really wanted to win. They just wanted to get through their year.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And Ron Hart. You can go to ronhart.com and take a look at everything. We love talking with him every week.
Putting the talk in news talk. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
Joining me right now is Michael Levine, and we're going to talk a little bit about all the focus on New York. But first, I want to ask you, are you safe? I know there's a huge fire going on out there in Malibu, which I know is not exactly in your neighborhood, but it's not that far.
No, I am safe, but the repetitive fires in Malibu, it just seems like every, 2 or 3 years, they just repeat and repeat and repeat. And so I am safe, and thank you for asking me, but very concerning. It just, the repetitive nature of it all.
Well, and this started, from what I understand, like 11 o'clock last night, and it's already engulfed like 1,000 acres of land. So it's a big problem, and it's very high rent property, right? I mean, it's Malibu.
That is true. That is true. All accurate.
So you've made some comments and written some things about New York and all the things going on. Of course, Daniel Penny was acquitted. Eric Adams looks like he's grown a backbone, and he's starting to talk about things the way you would expect a retired New York City police officer to talk about things, the mayor of New York. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, as a former New Yorker, I have particular feelings, emotions around this. It's almost like a Twilight Zone episode in which a city, the largest city in the country and one of the preeminent cities of the world, has gone from what was once the pristine jewel of America into a Twilight Zone episode in which up is down and down is up. This District Attorney Alvin Bragg is a man who, if there is a moral God, has a great deal of explaining to do. How Mr. Penny could even be charged is so ludicrous to my mind. It's literally unbelievable. I can tell you from all of my friends in New York City, they all say the same thing. No middle class or above New Yorker will go on a subway train, especially at night. Now, this is unthinkable 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and yet it exists. So the city has become a symbol, I guess, of why there's so many Americans, maybe Americans who voted for Donald Trump, are so revolted by the turn of events. And, you and I had a little debate last week, which I thought was very interesting because I have great admiration for you. And we were debating, if you recall, is America currently slightly decayed, or very decayed? I took the position it was very decayed, and you took the position it was slightly decayed. And, from my perspective, Daniel Penny is an evidence of my case, but there's many, many, many more. A $35 trillion deficit.
Well, and what's so crazy, too, is that we had this horrible thing that happened with the United Healthcare CEO being assassinated on the street in New York.
Right.
That, and that there are people on the left that are cheering that.
Absolutely.
But then the New York Times...
There was a woman... Absolutely.
But then but before you say what she said, and then the New York Times headline was, man who killed person on subway goes free. So it's crazy.
Yep. Yep. Well, it is literally upside down. It is a total moral inversion. And of course, this makes the case from my perspective, and I know you have a different view, that we are deeply decayed. If this is possible in the largest city in New York, that Daniel Penny can come to the rescue of a man menacing people and be tried and give up 18 months of his life. And then people on the left, a woman yesterday on Piers Morgan said she was joy-filled about it. I don't know what to say.
Look, I'm a more optimistic person than you are, Michael, and
yes,
I think that we can turn things around more quickly.
Yes.
But I will say that, it's funny. I've been married a long time, and my husband and I jokingly say that, I'm half full and he's half empty, and together we make a full glass, because I'm one of those people that I'm going to say things are great, and I keep going towards that cliff, and I'm going, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay. And he's the one that pulls me back right before I go over the cliff. But I also do that for him, because he gets a little down about things, and, sometimes I have to pump sunshine, his way. So
no, I acknowledge the vitalness of both.
Because look, you're in a place where you left New York probably in the late 60s, early 70s?
77.
77, late 70s. So New York was in a tough place then in the 70s.
Yes.
But you were young, you didn't care. You know what I mean? It's like, that's the thing. Right. I was in high school and college in the 70s, so I thought the 70s were great. But in a lot of cities, the 70s were bad, okay? Right. And then you had people that came along like Rudy Giuliani. And even though Rudy Giuliani has been greatly deposed in the last couple of years, he turned New York City around. And in just a couple of years, you went from not being able to walk down the street and nothing but peep shows in Times Square to it's a family place now.
It's 100% accurate. The difference between the culture of that day and the culture of today, the reason I would argue that we're deeply decayed as opposed to decayed or slightly decayed, is because America does not seem to have the will that it once had to do the things necessary to clean up the decay, right? If we've gone in the last 10 years a deficit from $25 trillion to $35 trillion, that's not a good trend line.
No, it's not. It's not. And I would argue that a lot of this stuff is fake, and I don't mean that the debt's not real, but it's like, because we don't do any real look and audit and that kind of thing, that there could be some cleaning up to do, and maybe the problem's 32 trillion and not 37, but that's still a huge, huge problem, because we're borrowing money from ourselves.
Right. Both political parties have figured out both. No, more Democrats and Republicans, but both political parties have figured out that giving out free money to voters is a very, very effective way of maintaining their political office. And so when Joe Biden says, I'm going to pay for all free student debt, there is no free. Now, that should be fairly evident to anyone over the age of 10. But our politicians have found a very effective tool of preserving their political office, giving out free money. And we bought it. We've been sold a bill of goods. We bought it. And we were given very romantic gift wrapping about how we're really entitled to it and so forth. It's just a very bizarre world, and it is a cause for pessimism. On the other hand, I respect your point of view as well.
I know. Michael Levine, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, friend.
To hear the full versions of last week's Martha Zoller shows, go to the podcast page at accesswdun.com, and you can follow me on social media at Martha Zoller.